Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our guest hosts, Scott Fraser, who comes to us in a background in publishing. So I'd love if, Scott, you can do a little bit of introduction of what you're doing now, and then we'll go back in time and try to learn a little bit more about what Scott was like as a kid. So what are you up to now?
Sure. Okay, so I turned 40 years old last year in 2020.
All
right, so that's the stage of life I'm at, and I'm currently working as the president and publisher of Dundurn Press, which is a book publishing company based in Toronto, Canada.
That's amazing. So I'd love to go back in time and talk a little bit about what Scott was like as a kid. So what are some of the earliest, fondest memories that you have? Were you kind of a sporty kid? Well, I guess there's probably books in there somewhere. Or what was it like growing up in the Scott Fraser household?
So my earliest memories happen in Cobourg, Ontario, which is a small town about an hour and a half east of Toronto. And I remember having a little pond in our backyard in our family house where I learned how to skate. This was, and we had ducks living in this little pond, and quite an extensive wilderness area behind the house. So my earliest memories really involve kind of hiking in these trails, these forested areas with my mother, and playing with the ducks and frogs and other little creatures that lived in the backyard. When I was about 6 years old, we moved to Durham region, which is a little bit closer to Toronto, the Whitby-Oshawa area. I remember being kind of I think I was a socially quiet kid. Like I didn't really mix too much. I don't. So when I was very young, I don't remember having an awful lot of friends. I spent a lot of time with my older sister. It was it's like pretty standard suburban kind of family dynamic. The 2.3 kids and the 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. I don't remember having a white picket fence, but it was pretty. That was kind of the aspirations of the family, I would say, to have that kind of middle class kind of life.
Cool. And then what was kind of the progression? So I know you did a stint in the armed forces, and you're definitely involved in books. So where did those things come into your sphere of influence?
Well, for me, fast forwarding from childhood into adolescence, I think books, like I was a precocious reader, and I think I kind of used books to build myself up a little bit, because I think there was definitely some self-esteem issues. I don't know if the folks listening can see, but I am Black. So growing up in the 80s, it was just tough, right? It was a different culture, a different world, and not to say that all those problems have gone away in the 21st century or anything, but as it was a kind of the 1980s. It was a tough time to grow up as a Black kid in a predominantly white town. But I had some friends, but books were always kind of a refuge. It made me feel like this is the thing I can hang my hat on. Like I was a pretty good athlete, but not the best. But I could impress people with my intelligence that I was completely plagiarized from books. I just ripped it off from what I read. Not an original thought in my head until quite a lot later.
And what were some of those key books, right? Were there a couple ones that stuck out, like, wow, these ones really kind of hit home, either because of the storytelling or inspiration or whatever? What were some of those key ones in terms of growing up for you?
Well, it's funny because my partner and I are getting ready to move out of our house temporarily because it's old and it needs to be renovated. But I was going through a bunch of stuff because we're purging, we're throwing out all kinds of stuff. And I finally have come around to trying to organize my books, and I found an absolutely battered paperback of a novel that I think it was published in the 60s. That I found it in the Whitby Public Library. So there's still a little a borrower slip in the book. It's stamped with Whitby Public Library, and I'm pretty sure I paid for it. I'm not the kind of person that would steal books, but especially not from a library. It's called The Mask of Apollo, and it was the first book that I read that depicted same-sex relationships in a positive way. And that was actually, I didn't realize it at the time, but it just kind of opened my mind a little bit about being accepting, and it was certainly surprising to read a book like that. I had never considered, I think I was probably like 14 or 15 or 16, something like that, and I'd never really thought about that other than as something that other people do over there. So that was kind of I think it really broadened my mind, and I think that is the power of books.
That's amazing. So we're kind of in the adolescent years, and you're probably in that stage where mom and dad want you to kind of grow up and figure out what you want to do when you go to college, university, or whatever is in the cards at that point in time. What was kind of that decision-making process of like what to do from a career standpoint as you were growing up?
Well, so I don't know how many, maybe the middle children out there can relate, but I was a middle kid, and I was the boy. I'm sandwiched between two sisters. And I don't think, this may not be fair to my parents, but I don't think that they thought I was necessarily going to be the high achiever of the family. I think, academically, my older sister, she was the gifted student.
Okay.
My little sister was quite a hardworking student, and has always seemed to have quite a bit of focus in her life. Whereas I was quite lost. I struggled in school. I did okay with sports and athletics, so that was kind of an anchor for me. But like I said, I was never good enough at sports where it was like, okay, this guy's, we can make a career, make it to the pros or something.
Sure.
So I really didn't have a clear idea in my mind. There was a lot of pressure for us to pursue academics.
Okay.
Like I certainly wasn't encouraged to consider a career in the trades, for example. For my dad, education, and specifically higher education, was sort of the core operating principle. That was a strategy that worked well for him and worked well for his father. And I think that kind of immigrant experience where you repeat the pattern because it worked. Yep. So my grandfather, somehow managed to get through university in Canada in the 50s and 60s. And my father went to university, has a master's degree, so that was sort of the path. That was what we were supposed to do. You're supposed to do well in school and then go to university. So the idea would be, the kind of careers that were on the table: teaching, law, medicine, maybe engineering. But it was really like the idea was that my sisters and I were supposed to pursue one of these good, well-paying professions. And at least in my case, that certainly didn't work out.
So what ended up happening? So you have these expectations. You're expected to go to school, and then what is kind of the decision-making process along the way? So you weren't, I guess, academically as robust a student as maybe your sisters. The sports side or athletic side wasn't going to get you a scholarship anywhere. So like trades and stuff were frowned upon. So how did kind of the thought process to kind of choose a career path go for you?
Yeah. So the first important decision I made as a teenager, I decided around grade 11, at the end of grade 11, going into grade 12, and I'm old enough that I had to do grade 13 or OAC in Ontario. But around grade 11, I decided that I wanted to go to university.
Okay.
And so I started attending class, doing the assignments, paying a little bit more attention in school. Enough to get my grades up that I was accepted into the U of T. Okay. So that, like, the first decision I made was a conscious one to pay a bit more attention to school. So I finished up high school with the grades to get into U of T. Barely. I had to really work hard to up my average because I had, I was, like I said, I was a very poor student right up until grade 12. So getting into university, that was about 18 months of me really working hard at high school. And getting into U of T, I originally sort of thought, okay, I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible and get into law school, hopefully with only 2 years of undergrad, maybe 3 if I have to. I might finish the degree. But my thing was I wanted to get into law school as fast as possible so I could start making money. And I think the pressure to earn a living and to start making income was pretty high. I mean, and I'll put it this way: the summer job options for a kid in Whitby, Oshawa, unless your parents owned a business or had connections, it was pretty limited. So in addition to, I think, we've talked about my first job in the past, which was umpiring baseball. So I got involved. I kind of parlayed my interest in sports into a part-time summer job, which turned out to be a great thing for me to do. So I was earning a little bit of money umpiring, but obviously tuition is more than what I, generally speaking, more than what I could make in a summer.
Yep.
And so I started supplementing that by working part-time, in the summers and part-time in factories in Oshawa. So there's lots of industrial, back at least, 25 years ago, there was quite a strong industrial base in the area. So, I worked in factories, I worked in warehouses, and I found it really difficult. It's hard work. It's hard on the body. It's hard on the mind. It's just really, really tough work. And that led to a second major decision in my life, which was screw this. I'm not. I don't want to work in factories for the rest of my life. And by the way, I started in this time. I resumed some of my bad study habits. I got off to a great start at U of T and then lost interest. So my grades started to slip again. So I was in a real tough spot. Like my plan to fast track my career in law was in flames because I couldn't focus on school, and I was, breaking my body working in these factories, and umpiring was quite a physical job as well. And being young, this young man, so I could handle it. But then I thought, okay. This isn't for me, and what else is? And I started looking again for some inspiration, and thought about I started thinking for the first time about a military career. And that was something that the military has played a substantial role in my family's history on both sides of the family tree. So I decided to give that a go. And at first it was meant to be sort of like, I joined the reserves, which is sort of like, it's part-time, a limited commitment. But before I knew it, it was my career. So I thought I was just going to dip my toes in the water, but before I knew it, that was what I did, and I was a soldier.
So tell us a little bit about that decision-making process. So you're in law school, things aren't going so well, and then I guess what you did is reflected back on kind of the family history and said, you know what, there's a bit of kind of this military background. Maybe I'll give it a go. So what's that decision-making process like to actually like kind of switch out and pursue that other path?
Well, just to clarify one thing, I never applied to law school.
Okay.
I applied to join the military after my second year, after my second year of university. Funds were low. And if folks will remember, this would have been around 2001. So obviously there was a big, the September 11 was a major event. And I figured it was paradoxically a good time to join the military, because I assumed that the recruiting drive would be in full speed ahead, because I was anticipating a period of war and conflict, which turned out to be probably a little bit longer than anyone anticipated. But it was opportunistic. I knew the military was hiring. I figured that it would be a way to to kind of get out of the factories, to have a bit of I saw it as a potential route for upward mobility. Certainly it seemed like a better career choice than hoping that I could latch on with one of the auto unions or whatever in town. And because like I said, my by second year of undergrad, my grades were sinking again. And it was never a case of not being smart enough or not being clever enough. It was just a complete lack of interest and focus, right. Which has plagued me for it's been kind of my Achilles heel for most of my life, is that lack of focus.
So tell us a little bit about kind of that transition into the armed forces then. So to that lack of focus, maybe you're bored of school and you mm-hmm. try to find your next adventure. So the armed forces is it. So you join the reserves and start spending more time there. And then what's kind of the progression, or what's the career like in the Army?
Well, first things first, for better or for worse, the military will get a young man like me to sit still and pay attention.
Right.
So it did give me a kind of a focus and a drive that I hadn't had before. Almost like I think right before I joined the military, I had started training in martial arts quite seriously for about a year or two before I joined the military. And until then, that was sort of my first sort of discipline focus. You're going to learn how to do this training. Mm-hmm. And so I would say the military gave me that kind of I guess it's a strange thing to say, Luki. It's like that, just a bit of focus. That kind of I was determined to pass my courses, to pass my training, to be a good officer, to be a good leader. And so it gave me something to it gave me an identity that I think I lacked before.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounded like you had a little bit more of like a purpose, a goal, and kind of that identity where, I mean, law, if you never really saw yourself in that light, and maybe that's where it was waning a little bit. Now the armed forces, and from my understanding, they're a bit of a family where everyone takes care of themselves and all that stuff. So maybe you found a little bit of that in there as well. And then how does that turn into a career in publishing? Sounds a little bit different as well.
So this is I joke sometimes that this is my FAQ. Okay, so when people learn about me, they're asking about publishing. The FAQ is, how the heck do you go from the military to book publishing?
Right.
And I get I guess I understand it. I think there's probably some stereotypes about the kind of people who join the military, which are, I think that maybe there's some truth to it, but I think largely it's kind of, from film and TV. But I remain very bookish. I mean, I did an overseas deployment, and so with the United Nations, and in flying to Sudan, my trunk, my gear box, I brought a small library with me to Sudan, and I carried it with me across the country. And I just refused to be anywhere without a selection of reading material.
Cool.
And then my partner back home was sending me mail, which included books in just about every care package I received. So I was always reading. And it was during that deployment that I realized that the military was not going to be my permanent home. Like, it wasn't like this was. I was coming to the end. And when I got back, the position that within the forces that I had been hoping for had been filled by someone else, and so they kind of they shuffled me off into the public affairs office, where I wasn't really having a good time. And luckily, at that point, I was working for a boss who was very pro education, and she I guess she I think she saw some potential in me, because she did offer me offer to put me on a training course to put me on the promotion track.
Okay.
But I just said no. And she was very good. She allowed me to a little bit of time to kind of figure out what I was going to do. She gave me the time I needed to work on. In this time, I decided while I was still in Sudan that I was going to finish my degree. So she gave my boss in the public affairs department. She let me work on my schoolwork when I was even when things were slow, or like I'd be at the base writing an essay and whatever. Like if I was had a shift as a duty officer, it was like people just like they allowed me to work on my schoolwork. So it was like I managed to finish the degree pretty quickly. And at that time, my older sister Shannon, who I mentioned, we've always been very close. She was at the Ryerson University, the Chang School publishing program.
Okay.
I had no idea what I was going to do post-military. Completely lost. So I just followed I did what I always did when I was a kid and followed Shannon. she was doing this thing. I had no idea that there was a book publishing industry in Canada until I was about 30 years old, coming out of the military. So it's really just my sister was doing it. I thought, hey, if I could probably do it. I've been following her my whole life. So I enrolled, and I suppose that's the rest is history. I got into publishing. I haven't left.
Sounds good. And before we get into that, I would love if you could share a little bit about what you mentioned about kind of that realization that this wasn't for me, right? Back in the Army, so you're on deployment, and because a lot of folks, right, this is great, this is awesome, and you had a little bit of that before, but then you had this realization, okay, this is not going to be my home anymore. What does that realization like feel like, or what? How do you have that realization?
Well, so there was, I think it was the culmination of a bunch of things that had been that had gone down. I started to I became a really strong critic of the war in Afghanistan, and I think that kind of I lost faith in the institution of the military, in part because of my personal direct experience, but in part seeing how things were playing out, not just in Afghanistan, but with the guys coming back from deployment. And so that whole story about we're a family started to become less and less, it looked less and less like the truth.
Right.
And so it was a major existential crisis for me, I guess a quarter life crisis, where I think the confluence of all these observations and experiences shaking my view of reality, that was traumatizing. It was like losing a family. Like, I really it felt like I've never been divorced, but I imagine that that kind of separation or family breakdown would feel kind of similar. Like it felt I guess like that. It felt like I was breaking up with my adopted family.
Well, so it seems like there's a whole bunch of different factors. It wasn't just one epiphany type moment. It was like all these different things. And back to what you mentioned about like kind of shaking your identity. It's like, well, you believe what's true wasn't necessarily the case. So you had to go down this other path. So now that we're plugged back into the kind of publishing path, so you followed older sister, which has been so good so far, and I guess has the path been pretty straightforward? You kind of grow up the ranks, because publishing has been in a pretty challenging situation over the years as well. So I can't imagine that was a straight line either.
No, I've had lots of ups and downs, and I guess it's a sign that I've become a grizzled veteran in the publishing industry, because I get invited to talk to students now. So it's kind of like I used to think of myself as one of the young guns coming up in the business, and now I'm talking to kids I'm talking to young people who are young enough to be my children, and that's kind of interesting, and I do like to I just feel confident enough in where my journey to say that, I've had ups and downs. I've been fired. I've been laid off. I've had conflicts with bosses, with colleagues. It's not been a straightforward progression. It's been a very difficult adjustment. coming out of the military into civilian life, that was a difficult adjustment. And then figuring out how to navigate this new world and how to make the best of, as you say, a very difficult industry. How to try to innovate in an industry that is well, I mean, it's conservative almost by nature. I mean, it's the basic model hasn't changed very much since Gutenberg made the printing press. So you know, it's all this new technology presents challenges for our business and opportunities.
Sounds good. So could you give us a few of those kind of highlights, maybe some of the general swipes? So what do you share with some of the students in your talk that are trying to get into publishing, so they can, well, watch this podcast before they have to stay for your talk, and
yeah, that's right. They don't need to.
Well, and then they can ask the more pointed questions about anything more specific. So it's not just kind of the general stuff; it's the more specific. So what are some of the things that you would probably share with folks heading into the publishing world, and maybe just generally
yeah. So one of the swikes in my life is a question, and it's a question that I ask myself, and I sometimes I still screw this up, which maybe we can talk about later. But the question is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Okay.
And they're not always the same thing.
Okay.
And I think when I was younger, I had a tendency to think that I'm right, and not only am I right, but that means that you're wrong. And to hell, I don't care what it does to our relationship. I'm right, and that's not effective in work, in career, unless you're working all by yourself. You can't be like that. You can't be that. It doesn't matter if you're the boss. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room. It doesn't matter if you're a special rarefied genius. You still have to get along with other people, because work is a social practice. It's a social exercise, unless you're lucky enough to work completely in isolation all by yourself. But then you probably have customers. You probably have clients. You probably have other stakeholders who sometimes are going to drive you nuts. So that's a major swike for me, is do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
That's amazing. Actually, I talk to a lot of folks where sometimes in the career coaching and the counseling perspective, it's similar but different. Where would you rather be happy or would you rather be right? Because oftentimes when you're dealing with someone else, you want to be right, and to your point, you want to emphasize that to get your point across and acknowledge that they're doing something incorrectly or differently. And then often that doesn't end up with happiness. So in your case, you translate happiness to effectiveness, which I think is in some cases similar things, right?
Well, certainly, like to reduce conflict, because I don't I always say at work that I don't mind lively debate, and it can certainly look like conflict, especially because in books everything we do is so it's political and personal. Okay, so we're talking about we're often when we're working in books, we're often touching people's core values, which is always, that's a a yellow light. It's caution. You could poke someone on a nerve that can draw a reaction. But there's a difference between disagreeing and that kind of like digging one's heels in, and okay, here's the military term: which hill do you want to die on? Like is every single inch of ground worth fighting for? Probably not. Not.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one that folks should consider, especially as they learn to deal with folks, because unfortunately that's not part of the core curriculum, right? Nobody really teaches you how to deal with people in that. There should be a course maybe in first year or in high school or whatever, like People 101, right? And this should probably be one of the first topics that are taught. What are some other pieces of swike that you'd want to share with yourself if you had young Scott in various points of his careers, maybe some of the most pivotal ones? What are some of the things that you'd want to share with him?
Well, this one looks inward. The last one kind of deals with how to deal with other people. This one is about how to deal with yourself. And for me, it's the goal of unconditional self-acceptance. So it's really easy to accept yourself when you're scoring all the goals or hitting all the home runs or you're getting A's in school. It's a lot harder to accept yourself when you're not doing so well. But that's the challenge, right? So I know I make so many mistakes at work, and usually the mistakes I make aren't so much technical, they're social, because I've always been hard to work with. I know that. And so being able to accept myself, even when I can see that I've made a mistake, or I see that I'm not being the guy that I want to be, or if I'm being a little mean or authoritarian or rude, I can still accept myself. It's like, okay, I'm not my behavior. I can work to change my behavior. I can still accept myself even when I'm not perfect, which is just about every day.
I think that's amazing, and for folks to really have that self-awareness where they can be conscious of some of the things that aren't perfect, whatever perfect is about them, and then to your point about that self-acceptance, I think that self-acceptance, self-love, whatever it is, and saying, you know what, you are who you are, and also not identifying yourself based on your past, right? Because every moment you can make a new decision to say, you know what, I used to behave this way, but not today. not going forward, and you can always recover from that. But that doesn't mean you won't slide down that slippery slope back again. But there's always the hope that you can continue on in whatever path that you choose going forward.
That's right. So it's being forgiving. It's and I think in the context of the year plus that we've all just been through, I think that's even more important, the ability to accept oneself, because I know a lot of people are struggling to not just with work, but like even with basics, right? Like there are people who've lost their jobs, and I know I've experienced unemployment, and it can be a major, it often is a major crisis moment for a person.
Right.
And so if there's anyone in that position listening, I would just say that, now is a time more than ever that you need to accept yourself, even when things aren't going so well, because you're still worth it. It was really hard for me at times when my career were not going well, especially post-military, because I think in the military, there's just so much. It feels like you're a someone no matter who you are, because you'll always have people coming up and saying, "Oh, thank you for your service," or you have the thanks of a nation, community, and all this stuff. Now, try going from that to starting at the bottom rung of a career ladder and then losing your job.
Right.
That is really, really tough. And I'm not that tough of a person. So if I can do it, so can anyone else.
That sounds like that Mike Tyson quote where everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
That's right.
You got punched in the face, and then one of those proverbs of this too shall pass. So as challenging as any situation is, I mean, we'll get over it and come out stronger as a result. So I think that's a lot of good, useful words of wisdom, and would be happy to have you back for more of a discussion on any of these topics. I think there's a lot to unpack in there. But what are some of your future aspirations? And if folks wanted to connect with you, where could they reach out if they were willing, if they wanted to connect?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I would love to come back, and thank you for having me today. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn, Scott Fraser. You can also find me via the Dundurn Press. That's www.dundurn.com. Maybe you'll find a book that you want to read in there too. We'd certainly encourage anyone listening to take a look, and I suspect that there's something for everyone on our list. So yeah, I would definitely appreciate that kind of support, and happy to connect with anyone who's interested in books, publishing, the arts, business. I mean, I like talking to people. I like if anyone's curious in what I'm doing, I'm happy to talk about it.
Cool. And are there any big upcoming milestones that you're willing to share and kind of aspire towards, or kind of goals that are in the near future?
Well, now that things are starting to open up a little bit in Toronto, we're making preparations to open our small retail store in the east end of Toronto. So that's going to be exciting. And Dundurn is also, we're in preparations to celebrate our 50th anniversary as a company.
Wow. That's amazing.
And the last one, if I can, if there's anyone who's interested in very literary fiction, we've just launched a brand new imprint called Rare Machines. And you can find out more information about that at dundurn.com.
That's perfect. So thanks so much, Scott, for sharing your insights and some of your future career aspirations. And yeah, we'll look forward to having you back in a future episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.